Welcome to Restoration Beyond the Couch, hosted by Dr. Lee Long. In this episode, Dr. Long interviews Gregory S. Love, managing partner at Love & Norris and co-founder of MinistrySafe and Abuse Prevention Systems. Greg is an expert in legal standards of care related to child sexual abuse and has consulted with numerous organizations, including the U.S. Olympic Committee and U.S. Center for Safe Sport. He teaches the only graduate-level course on preventing sexual abuse in ministry contexts at Dallas Theological Seminary. Join us as we explore Greg's insights on protecting vulnerable populations, enhancing mental health and wellness through safety and legal care standards. Your path to mental wellness starts here.
I want to make sure that you, as our listeners, are aware that the topics discussed in this episode may be challenging or could even be activating or triggering for some. We will be discussing the topic of sexual abuse and, more importantly, prevention strategies. If you or someone close to you has experienced sexual abuse, please be mindful of how this content may affect you. Our goal in this discussion is to provide education for prevention.
Well, Greg Love, it is so great to have you on Beyond the Couch. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
How did this amazing organization come about with your legal background, with your experience? Tell us where this came from.
Yeah, and probably, of course, as you know, MinistrySafe is an organization that's designed to provide prevention resources to child-serving organizations, churches, camps, schools, nonprofits, youth sports organizations, but it's a full suite of resources, services, trainings, but it all arose not because someday I decided, there's a great need and I want to serve that need. It backs up about 3 decades into my wife, who's my law partner, Kimberly. Kimberly and I were litigating sexual abuse matters. Okay, now, even then, that wasn't our design. It wasn't our intention. And it all started with Kim representing somebody that was a whistleblower, someone who tried to report sexual abuse in 1992 and was fired from his job from trying to report sexual abuse. And as you know, in Texas, you can fire someone for just about anything, but you can't fire someone for trying to comply with the mandatory reporting requirements. Now, of course, back then, it wasn't presumed that all reports were good faith. So as a part of that whistleblower claim, Kim had to find those people that were claiming to have been physically and sexually abused at this organization. And turns out we wound up talking to 49 victims of abuse, covering another 20, 30 years period of time before that with multiple molesters. So it grew into a multi-plaintiff litigation at a time when there was really no such thing as sexual abuse litigation. And so from there, it was. And see, this is where I got to get a little legal on you, so tolerate this. See, as a civil trial lawyer, we're not prosecutors. We're not criminal lawyers. We deal in what are called standards of care. Now, standard of care is a snappy lawyer term for, with respect to a foreseeable risk, like sexual abuse, I'm bringing that lens with me to the train wreck. And that lens is standard of care. This is what you should be doing. But when we stand over the train wreck, oftentimes what we find is, this is in fact what you were doing. And see if there's a difference between what you should have been doing to protect and what you in fact were doing. That's what gives rise to liability. We call it negligence or gross negligence. So as civil trial lawyers, we're standing over the train wrecks and ultimately standing over hundreds of train wrecks as this type of practice began to morph after people found out about the successful result we had. And so after hundreds of times of standing over the train wrecks, see, as civil trial lawyers, we're seeing the patterns that most child-serving organizations are not seeing.
Right.
And see, and that actually is one of the good words in this is pattern, as you probably know.
Right. And as you guys are seeing these patterns, is this the development of MinistrySafe is from these patterns?
Correct. Because you see, if something has a pattern, it becomes predictable. And what's on the lawyer coffee cup is if something's predictable, it's preventable. It's just not intuitive. And so after standing over hundreds of these train wrecks, we get to see the patterns and get to realize Of course, this is how it happens. I don't care whether it's Catholic. I don't care if it's Boy Scouts of America. I don't care if it's YMCA. It's all the same pattern. It's the grooming process of the preferential offender. And so once we understood that, we can design safety around how the risk unfolds. And so that ministry safe is not just the subject matter experts creating resources, but finding also a way to take those resources and deploy them so people can design and implement something that can be a glove that fits their hand.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Being a therapist, and we see the outcomes of the trauma of these patterns when they're not interrupted. And you talk about the train wreck, and we're often left with the train wreck of trying to help heal the wounds that come from all that has cycled through there. So I probably am going to say this a lot in this podcast, but thank you for what you do. Um, Given these patterns, can you explain to our listeners the patterns of this predatory behavior that you guys have identified?
Yeah, and it's there's language that's necessary to understand this risk because in describing something to you, what I'm going to identify is one of the types of risks. And so when you say, well, what do you mean types of risk? You mean there's types of abusers? It's like, yeah.
There are.
See, most people are conditioned to think that this is all this watch out for the guy with beanie babies who drives the white van.
Right.
Okay. That's the caricature of this. But the reality is that more than 90% of the risk to children is posed by what we call the preferential offender, okay, who looks like you and me. So stranger danger is not what works to prevent 90% of the risk. And 90%, I'm talking about 60 million sexual abuse survivors, 1 out of 5 Americans, you know. And so what we need to do is understand this preferential offender has no visual profile. So the way we come at this is starting with the idea that the type of fence you build is driven by what you want to keep out. And since there's no visual profile, here's the big idea. Here's what goes on the next other side of the lawyer's coffee cup. We cannot recognize this risk visually. We must understand this risk behaviorally,
Oh,
which begs the question, what are the behaviors? And it's where we get that term that we call the grooming process. So putting all of that together, the type of fence you build, the safety system you develop is driven by what you want to keep out. You want to keep out the behaviors. So it desperately requires people to understand what are the behaviors? What is the grooming process? What are the behaviors by which somebody with a deviant sexual desire will try to target a child, create trusted time alone, manipulate and deceive that child unto inappropriate touch and talk? So that grooming process has a pattern, and that's the fundamental thing that we pride in teaching to be able to help people understand what the risk looks like, because then they have a chance to prevent it.
One thing I find in my own practice is that this grooming process is something that people really, really struggle with because they don't perceive that they were groomed. They think it's their fault. But as you see, and as I see, the grooming process is really truly a process. And I'm glad that you are touching on this and bringing it to light. And we parents, we educators, we clergy, we people of society, because I don't think that this is an institutional issue. Well, it is, but it's not only an institutional issue. This is an issue that is across the board. We need to be aware that grooming is a very real issue.
Definitely. Because some of the studies support that because it's a human problem, not just a institution or organization. And frankly, some of the research shows us that can a child be victimized at a VBS? Yes. Can a child be victimized in this little baseball team or youth sport? Yes. Daycare? Yes. Most of the risk happens to the child in the home environment. Okay. It's their core world, not the program. Okay. So when you start to understand the grooming process you understand there's two big efforts that are being described when we say grooming. There's the grooming of the child, to be sure, but there's also the grooming of the gatekeepers. Okay, and who are the gatekeepers? Parents, coaches, teachers, youth workers, babysitter, big brother, anybody through whom the abuser has to go to gain access to a child. See, this grooming of the gatekeeper happens before anybody's grooming a child.
Right.
Because you see, you have to get access to the child before this manipulation and deception can take place. So people need to understand, if I'm somebody that's involved with a program with children entrusted to my care, before any of my children are placed in harm's way, somebody first groomed me. Okay, and groomed me. What does grooming the gatekeeper look like? Convincing me that this person is helpful, trustworthy, and kind. Isn't that a kick in the pants? See, why? Because helpful, trustworthy, and kind is the currency that has you going from the outside to the inside. And this kind of the way we are wired psychologically is, if somebody's on the inside, we presume that they are safe. Then the child's in harm's way. So it's important that not just we focus on, what do I need to do to protect the child? What does this risk look like? You won't spot it visually. We just need to understand there are people out there with ill intent, and there is a pattern that this takes for someone to create that trusted time alone to victimize that child. So education is critically important, but it's also important to give people language. Lee, you'd be amazed in how many of the trainings that we do that are live trainings, when I get the opportunity to have the feedback with somebody, where they'll come up to me and go, "Oh my gosh, I knew there was something weird, but you just gave me language to understand what I was experiencing. This person was my uncle, or this person was a family member, or this person was a trusted teacher." And that's what they were doing. So even in those trainings, when somebody wasn't victimized, it's amazing how the lights come on to where they go back into their world or something with their own child and start to now understand what a person was doing in a particular circumstance that they didn't quite understand.
And don't you think that understanding, I mean, is really the key here? Because you don't want to walk around. The thing that I don't want anybody to take from this is that I need to be afraid of everyone. I need to side eye everybody who comes in. You're trusted. I don't know if you're trusted or not, but it's really to have a pattern of behavior that you're watching for. You're aware that it's bringing a sense of awareness, and like you said, language, because you're right that most abuse does happen in our home, in our home environment, with people that we're familiar with, and it typically happens that way because we are familiar with them. I mean,
Yeah. And this idea of being afraid, like there's a predator behind every tree, or some idea that just, it makes me anxious. I just want to get bubble wrap and duct tape. It's like, that's a wrong response to this. The right response is just to understand our environment's just broken. Okay, there are some people that mean to do harm. And rather than going around and trying to find some commune or some bunker, because by the way, the predators are in the communes too, is just to understand, this is what the pattern looks like. So I've been on a school board. I'm a parent. I've been involved in student programming, and I never did that out of fear, because now I have an education. I have an understanding of what this risk looks like. So what does that mean for me? First, I need to know thyself. Okay. How would I otherwise have been predisposed to assisting somebody to victimize a child? I operate under the guise that if someone is helpful, trustworthy, and kind, they've got to be safe. That's the first breakdown, Lee. Helpful, trustworthy, and kind does not equate to safe. Okay, Jerry Sandusky, I'll bet he was the most helpful dude in Pennsylvania. Okay, Larry Nassar, oh, he was really helpful to young gymnasts. Helpful doesn't mean safe. So what I need to understand is, I'm always going to have my guard up. My eyes are always going to stay open. If you convince me you're helpful, trustworthy, and kind, great. Come into my world and be helpful, trustworthy, and kind, but I'm never going to close my eyes. But close my eyes to what? The grooming process of the preferential offender. Okay. If I see the grooming behaviors, I don't care if you're educated, attractive, and articulate. I don't care if you tell me how much spiritual depth you have. I don't care how good you are at that sport. When I see the grooming behaviors, I see it immediately and I respond immediately. So I avoid who I used to be. Oh, you're helpful, trustworthy, and kind. I'm going to drop my guard, close my eyes, and trust you with my child. That's just not the way anybody needs to be living life in this day and age, actually, in any day and age. So, what I do instead, my guard is always up, my eyes are always open. You can convince me you're helpful, trustworthy, and kind. Great. Come into my community and my environment, meet my child. But my barrier never comes down and my eyes never close.
That's right. I love that because again, like you said, we don't need to live in fear. We need to live with wisdom and intelligence, and we need to seek education. So how does someone learn more about this?
Okay. When we first developed MinistrySafe, the goal was to protect children and those who serve them in different child serving capacities. Okay. It's equipping organizations that are going to gather children. And some of the feedback that we've gotten over the 4 million people that we've trained over a 30-year period of time is, this training was amazing. I wear a name tag at this particular school or at this nonprofit or at this scouting organization, and that made me a better leader. But I realized it also made me a better parent. Can we share this information with some of the parents at our schools or the parents that are sending kids to our camp? I thought, well, yeah, the training is still a little bit more of institutionally, this is how you protect children that you gather. But why don't we go ahead and just create a parent training? And so that's one of the things that we've done is a dedicated training that's equipping parents to understand this risk, how to talk to your child, at what age you talk to your child, what things you talk about, what are the things that need to get your radar up when you're starting to entrust your child into camp environments or sleepovers, things like that. So it's a equipping parents to have this information that's necessary so that they can have the knowledge, get their guard up, their eyes open as they shepherd their own little ones. So whether it's the sexual abuse awareness training that we provide to organizations, whether it's the peer-to-peer sexual abuse training or a parent training, we've got a whole waterfront of types of training so that if you want it, we'd love to be able to provide that to you.
That is so helpful because, like you said, it's again, I want to keep reiterating this. It is not about fear. I think about, based on what I do, I've heard all the backstories, and I think, people would laugh when my kids were little that you don't let your kids do sleepovers. I'm like, it's not that I don't let my kids do sleepovers. There's just a lot of caveats around if they get to do them or not. And they're like, "Oh, are you afraid of the boogeyman?" And I'm like, Not afraid at all. It's a sense of I've been entrusted with these three kids, and I want to make sure that, I have, as you've said over and over and over again, the knowledge and understanding of what I am releasing them to. And you all are providing like you said, a waterfront of wonderful resources to help people walk through the different things that they could be faced with trying to raise up these kids. I mean, these are, trying to prevent harm is part of being a parent, I would assume. Would you
Yeah,
agree?
for sure. And so even like when we first started entrusting our child to this basketball camp or into this, day camp or, staying at somebody's house after a certain age, I mean, we'd call that family and say, hey, we'd love to be able to send you this online training link and talk about what's going to be happening in your environment while our child is there. And so it's being wise as to how do you vet some of these organizations? What questions do you ask? Or even if you go to a church before I entrust my child to you, what are you going to do to make sure my child is safe? That's a great question. But parents, you need to know the answer to that question, not just ask it. And so it's knowable, but sadly, the preferential offender is not intuitive. So we're never going to accidentally get this right. Okay. It takes an intentional pursuit of information to understand this risk and then being able to navigate it.
Yeah. When you think about like there's so much in the news and it seems to be repetitive. Like it really, to me, it seems like you could take institution out, copy and paste new institution in, take this leader out, copy and paste this new leader, coach, whatever you want to call it in. What, how do you all talk about this? How do you all make sense of this? What is something that our listeners can, that how do you encourage them, like we've been talking about, not to walk around with this fear and mistrust these institutions? Because I think about the fact that, it hits churches, and then the first thing that happens in people's minds that I hear is, well, church is bad. Well, I don't think church is bad. I think that this person who was in this institution was bad. Or, you hear this coach, well, then all these teams are bad. What's your encouragement to people that are potentially walking through that unsettled space?
Yeah, just once again, put your broad brush away. There is no statement you're going to hear from me that churches are bad. Camps are good. Nobody is by themselves either good or bad. Whether or not your child is going to be safe from sexual abuse is part of an evaluation of, are you prepared for this risk? So even if I'm going to take my own child, but I'm not going as a lawyer, I'm going to ask, what do you do at your camp to protect children from sexual abuse? Okay. And I'm going to wait for the answer. And when I get the answer of someone very well-meaning telling me, oh, your kid's going to love it here. We do background checks. We have a child check-in system. We have a 6-month member rule. We have a 2-adult rule. We have video cameras. You're going to make this list for me, but I'm waiting for a particular answer. So after they make that list for me, I know my child is not safe here. Okay. Now that backs a lot of people up. Saying, no, wait a minute. That's what my organization does. Right. What are you looking for, Greg, on that list that you did not hear?
Thank
And
you.
what I am waiting for is somebody to tell me we're training our people to understand the grooming process of the preferential offender. Because the big idea is you can't reduce a risk you don't understand. And if you don't understand it, you have no fence in place. Okay. Or maybe you have a fence in place to keep away the white van that says free candy on the side. Okay. But that's such a small fraction of the problem. And so when you take, for example, the 88,000 young men that are suing Boy Scouts right now, 88,000 claims. Not one of those 88,000 young men were victimized by an abduction offender. There was no white van. There was no Beanie Babies and a trench coat involved. It's all preferential offender and peer-to-peer sexual abuse. Okay, so what I need to tell people is it's not this category of institution or these types of programs. You take them one at a time. You, parent, need to understand what is the preferential offenders grooming process, what is peer-to-peer sexual abuse, and then be prepared to ask the questions of each of those organizations, that daycare, this after-school mentoring program, this youth sport league. Are you prepared? Do you train your people, your stakeholders, your volunteers to understand the grooming process of the preferential offender so that you can see it? Do you have policies and procedures in place that are consistent with that understanding as to what you're going to do to prevent it? And do you have a communication plan in place in terms of internal communication and reporting to the authorities? Those are the things that I'm looking for on a case-by-case basis. Now, some organizations are doing that better than others, but it's primarily being driven by the crisis. So like you said, of changing out the names and the organizations, go back 25 years. You see, when people contact our law firm, say, oh, we got a ditch-like experience. Can you help us navigate this? I'm a nice guy. Yeah, you believe that, right? I'm a nice guy?
Really, I can attest to you.
Okay. So even though I'm a nice guy, I'll let you tell me your story. But after the first 2 sentences, I can finish your story for you. Because sadly, it's over and over and over. Again, there's that pattern word. But actually, if we do the work, the word pattern is a good word because it means it's predictable. And if we can get this information to the parents and the people that are serving children, this risk can be prevented.
Yeah, and this is where you all provide such an amazing offering, because we don't want to. I often think about you all and pray for you all a lot, because I think about the fact that you're in your work kind of leaves you in a sewer to some degree, because you're keeping up and keeping patterns and watching some really grotesque things. And going to the well of understanding comes from you all having seen those patterns over and over again. I don't think the common person wants to live in that, to have to understand that. And to me, that's such a beauty of what you all provide is, hey, let us handle that. We'll tell you what we're seeing. Come to us. We'll help you understand the grooming process. Because in grooming, one of the things that I see over and over and over again of the people who have been groomed is that it is a mind twisting thing for them. Because part of the grooming process is to put the onus on the victim to think that they're their problem. And just the ugly, horrible marks that leaves on them. And so I don't know, I just, again, thank you for what you do.
Yeah, the topic is awful, but I want you to know that in the midst of the awful, there is some beauty in seeing the strength of people that are surviving, that are pursuing health and wellness. And even if we just play a small part of that, now we're not classic counselors, the way they call lawyers counselors. I'm a prevention expert. I'm not a care expert, but I get all kinds of opportunities to, whether it's in the representation of victims or just to meet people, because it's not just about the capacity as a trial lawyer. It's I'm meeting real people. This is their story. I'm hearing about real stories and how about the things that we're doing are downstreaming into their children, their grandchildren, and making a difference. The most grody part of all of this, Lee, is being on the phone with leadership at these organizations that the mindset is, how can we keep this toothpaste in the tube? How can we not have to change? How can we avoid these particular impacts of the law? Those are the people that I just want to make do push-ups. They're the people that make me angry. So is this whole topic difficult? Yes. But from doing this work, and see, again, I'm not just beyond the couch. I'm not anywhere near the couch. Okay. But I know in the work that I've done that there is a redemptive value of it, not just a preventative value. So, for example, part of the grooming process will leave a child generally holding on to three pieces of information. One, no one will believe me. Sadly, most of the time that's true. Somehow it was my fault and I'm the only one. So I will never leave a conversation, for example, when somebody comes up to me, even if it's the guy, says, you know what, that's kind of my story. Like, whoa, whoa. I want you to know, I believe you, and it's not your fault, and you're not the only one. I mean, just saying those things to somebody, as simple as that sounds, and as formulaic as it may come out, it speaks to someone who really needs to hear those things. With the it's somehow my fault is typically, in my experience, the hardest one to see somebody let go of. But to even start that dialogue, which might help that person onto a pathway of hope and healing, is a beautiful thing in what ultimately is a dark type topic.
Boy, that's true. And you are spot on with the not feeling like they're going to be believed, that is such a space. Even when they understand that they weren't the only one and it wasn't their fault, there still is that space that when they find out that there's other people involved, it's still, this somehow must have been my fault. I somehow must have been involved in all of this, that I somehow bear the weight of this.
What's doubly awful about that is you have the abuser convincing of that, but because you have people without the education and without the understanding of what the grooming process is, you have well-meaning adults asking stupid questions that come out as compounding the shame. You're like, well, what were you wearing? Well, why didn't you scream? Well, why didn't you tell me? All of these are being spoken into a child's world of, yes, that's what I should have done. You're right. If I would have done that, it would have stopped. I knew I shouldn't have worn that cute little pair of shorts you bought me. It's like, and when the child's trying to process that, it's more things for someone like you to have to undo, even beyond the grooming that led to the molestation.
That is very, very, very well said. And I'm curious as to your take on this. I find that it's a person, like you said, well-meaning, who's in some way trying to find how they could have prevented this. Because if I could have prevented it, then it won't happen again. And so they're looking for that sense of control, but it already occurred. And so trying to put that on a kid is damaging. And I'm curious as to your take on that.
Well, I don't see it from the standpoint of a counselor, but when I have people sharing with me their stories, or I have organizational leadership, they'll have a crisis they need to speak into, and they're preparing talking points to a community or a family talk from a church or a camp or a school. It's just amazing how if people don't have an understanding of the grooming process and the trauma that somebody is experiencing, that trauma is not an isolated thing that's set and that's all you need to deal with. It's almost like an ongoing being buffeted by additional people's comments and the way in which they're speaking to them. It's like when we see somebody saying from the front of an organization, now remember, in our legal system, Bob is innocent until proven guilty. It's like, I just want to make you do push-ups. It's like, yeah, that's a correct expression of the maxim of legal principle in the United States. But what have you just done? You've just told every victim in the room, not just the one that's at issue, that you're a liar unless 12 people agree. But it's just inartful. You need to have an understanding of this risk before you can navigate, especially if there is one person or several people that you're not having met yet that have suffered forms of trauma and how that trauma can be compounded. And so by the time we'll visit with somebody, whether it's in the legal capacity or having met them, there's the underlying abuse, and then there's all the things that were inartful, that were said, done, and it's like, well, that'll mess up Christmas. You probably shouldn't talk about that. Oh, well, that's just your handsy uncle. You shouldn't, mention that. It's like it's minimizing and it's shaming and it's almost like it creates its own additional form of trauma that by the time that person's sharing it with me, they're not asking me to be somebody that unsnarls those things in a counseling capacity, but it's just knowing what I know and feeling what they have experienced and continue to experience. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking. And what's, hearing those examples that you were giving, oh, well, that's your handsy uncle, or, that's just how it goes. That is aiding, in my opinion, that's aiding the grooming process. You're normalizing the grooming process. And I just, I don't know. I think about that and I think, I think to your earlier point, like there's well-meaning people who contribute in ways that they're ignorant to their contribution. And to your point, education is really I think the key here of understanding what's in front of us.
I think that education changes culture and culture changes environment. And when we create an environment where people are comfortable to say, this has been my experience, just that is healthy all by itself. Whether that person wants to go sit on a couch with someone like you or not, but just to take away some of that hostility, the fear and the shame and the sense of rejection they anticipate because that's what they've been experiencing. I'm sold out that if we can continue to give people eyes to see and ears to hear, I can change what their mouth speaks.
I think that your points are so well made, Greg, and I hope that our listeners take from this that it is critical to be educated, that we need to understand this process. Don't be afraid of it. Walk right into the process of understanding, what does grooming look like? How does somebody understand that? And just for clarification, if somebody wants to know more about this grooming process, how do they engage you? How do they engage you in your system? As you said, this waterfront of opportunities that you have for individuals. Where do they begin? What do they touch on to learn more about this?
Hey, what I'm going to do, Lee, I'm going to create a landing page called ministrysafe.com/restoration.
Okay.
Okay. If somebody wants to go to ministrysafe.com/restoration, I'll put a button on there that all you have to do is click it, and you can send yourself a training link to either the sexual abuse awareness training or the peer-to-peer training or the parent training. Don't let there be any reason why you have to call me and I'd be available, or my staff. Just make it automated that if you want the information, it's at your fingertips at no cost, because we're sold out on making sure that if we can give you eyes to see, we can change the way you perceive, we can change the way you can navigate, you can say the right things, avoid some of the ditches. But I really am sold out that that's the key.
Wow. Thank you. That's incredible. Thank you for doing that. I agree with you. I agree with you that we've got to keep people out of the ditch here, because this leaves a lasting mark. Now, that's not to say that if this has occurred in your life, that there's not a sense of being able to walk through it and overcome the damage and live a life that is full and restored and whole, that you'll have a life worth living and that you can celebrate restored freedom. But if we can prevent these major accidents, why not?
Without a doubt.
Is there any tidbit of advice or anything that you'd want to leave our listeners with?
Yep. One thing that's always important, like when people say, Greg, you got 20 minutes, teach me something. It's like, see, here's the big idea. Here's the principle that I've understood in doing this work for more than 30 years. Okay. What we believe shapes what we do. Okay. If we believe wrong things or not enough of the right things, here's how that works. If you believe wrong things, you do wrong things, and it gets you into the pattern of the ditch. Okay. But the opposite is also true. If I can move out some of the bad information, some of the misconception and error, and put in the good information, training, now here becomes the pattern. I believe the right things, I do the right things, I avoid the ditches. So it's the know thyself. Okay. Know that you're probably holding on to errors and misconceptions. This idea that stranger danger is the answer, that I can spot the abuser, or that background checks at this institution is going to solve the problem. It's like, let all of that go and commit to spend an hour being able to put the good information in. And the good information is to recognize what are the facts versus the misconceptions. What are abuser characteristics? What is the grooming process? What are common grooming behaviors? What is peer-to-peer sexual abuse? What is my reporting obligation? An hour. Believe the right things, do the right things. So it's just commit to an hour. If you realize after that, whoa, there's a lot more information that I need to know, given my role, given I have a special needs child, or giving some of these other things, then chase that information. But at least go get the fundamental information to understand what is this risk so that you can understand how you navigate it.
Brilliantly stated. Thank you. I just want to say thank you again. I mean, I know I've said it a few times. I'm going to say it for the rest of my life, knowing you. Thank you for what you and Kim do. I see you all as warriors in our culture, and protectors of the least of these, being the children, and being those who need that help being protected. And so I know that you all have meant a lot to me, and the things that you all have done have meant a lot to me and to our family. And again, thank you for that. And I hope that I hope our listeners have taken something from this that they can impact in their life, and that I hope that their takeaway is, don't be afraid. This isn't about fear. This is about learning. It's about education. And I hope that they will, as you've said, know thyself. I always say, show up. Show up. And I hope that they show up for themselves in this. Don't be afraid of it. Show up. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all of your wisdom.
Anything you want, anytime you want it.
Thank you.
If you found value in our discussion and wish to uncover more about the fascinating world of mental wellness, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where Dr. Long will continue to delve into empowering therapies and strategies for mental wellness. Your journey to understanding and embracing mental health is just beginning, and we're excited to have you with us every step of the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember to celebrate restored freedom as you uncover it.